The distraction and the misdirection of the public, it's very embarrassing when you think about how easily the public is distracted. It becomes very frightening when you realize the agenda that is controlled by an entity that is able to control the narrative on all of the media. When you have entities like Bloomberg that own so much of the media, when you realize that four companies or so own just about every single magazine, TV station, radio station, media outlet that there is. And the fact that so many of these things are sliding underneath the realization or the attention of the public, um, because of some sort of a distraction. The media distracts and talks about things that are completely non-relevant while ignoring the bigger issue, being ignoring the really important things. There's virtually no attention whatsoever on the mainstream media about what's going on with Hunter Biden, about what is going on with the whistleblower claims. It's getting no attention whatsoever. It's getting, and then the attention that you see is, very, very slanted. In fact, to me, it's emblematic of a very frightening trend, and that is there is no journalistic integrity whatsoever anymore. Kristalina Georgieva has said a lot of things lately that have been very concerning. I'll get to that point. She said recently that she blamed the problem with the banks in the US on complacency, and that the ability of savers to move their money online with a single click would require a lot of new regulatory thinking, and that it's the speed in which money can move from one place to another that is something that she was concerned about. And I think that she is certainly someone who you should pay attention to. The IMF might be the second most powerful bank in the world, and in reading a little bit about that report, I understand that what she basically said was that she wants to be able to have a common regulatory framework for digital currencies that will allow for global inoperability or interoperability. In other words, that each country is supposed to have their own CBDC by 2025. That was according to the BIS, which would be one notch above the IMF, and in terms of where they are in the hierarchy. And so when I read that report, and maybe I read it incorrectly, what I took away from it was that she was talking about having these kind of like a gateway for these currencies to talk with one another, or it would be filled by private currencies such as XRP, such as Bitcoin, that if they didn't do this, that you would see a vacuum that would pull in other private cryptos that would fill that void. I don't know that she is a advocate of any of the private ledger currencies such as Bitcoin or XRP or Ripple, any of them. I think she's more of a government lackey who is talking about using CBDCs and one common language for them all to communicate with one another. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. I am not really sure, but what I am sure about, look, the BIS said by 2025, everyone needs to have an operational CBDC. And, one of the things that I really took away from what she says was that if they are not backed by an asset, then they're just speculative investments. In other words, she thinks that they need to be backed by something. And I also think it's interesting that they published a report a few months ago about gold. The IMF had a report that said gold, a barbarous relic. What did it say? Gold as an international reserve currency, question mark, a barbarous relic no more. Is this why the BIS reclassified gold as the world's only other tier one reserve asset? Is this why the central banks are buying it? Is she intimating that in order to have legitimacy on the world stage, you must have a CBDC pegged to something like gold to give it legitimacy. I don't know. There are a lot of things that she's been saying lately that make me believe we are moving away from the banking system, that we are consolidating in an effort to roll out CBDCs, and she is an advocate of having them pegged to something. I don't know what role we will see Ripple or XRP, although I see a lot more talk about it lately in various circles. I just think that an institution like the IMF and the BIS are going to do all of they can to control, not decentralize, but to actually centralize whatever central bank or digital currency they roll out. I quite frankly think they're more afraid of something like XRP and Ripple and Bitcoin, which allow a more freer, an ability to trade in a more free fashion. I think it concerns them. And I think that's why she said that if they don't do something like this, that it opens up the likelihood that that vacuum gets filled by other private ledger or open ledger. I don't even know the correct way to say it. Opens it up to things like Ripple, like Bitcoin, like other things that are not centralized and controlled by the government. So I guess what I'm simply saying is this: I don't know that she is a fan of XRP and Ripple as much as she understands that if they don't do this, the inevitability of these types of platforms will find their way into the global system. So I don't know if it's pro or con, but I do think she's someone to take very seriously. Everyone on the planet's owned dollars for 50 years, and if they no longer need to, they dump dollars. That creates the inflation. But the byproduct is of spiking interest rates. You can't have 25% inflation and 5% interest rates, or your currency becomes worthless. So when interest rates rise, not controlled by the Fed, but by the market to compensate for the hyperinflationary dumping of dollars, then everything that is inversely related to rising interest rates, namely stocks, bonds, and real estate, collapse. And here is your great reset. And here is what I really am getting at, is that this intended? Because why would it be intended? Well, we have nearly 200 trillion in debt we can never pay off, and instead we now have a villain. It's Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC and all of these bastards that did it to us. And what becomes really interesting is you look at the top two advisors to the Biden White House. One is Lael Brainerd. She was at the Fed, she was at the Treasury, she's a modern monetary theorist that wants to get rid of all the banks and go directly to the public, the central bank with the digital currency. Well, look at what's happening to the banks. Look at how the Federal Reserve continues to leave rates where they are, allowing this mass exodus out of the banks into treasuries, and talking about the fact that, or even the fact that the Fed has allowed the money markets to invest in the overnight reverse repo market, which has allowed the money markets to provide daily liquidity at 5% guaranteed by the Fed. That's greater than you get in any CD in a regional bank that Janet Yellen said won't be bailed out when they go under this time. So you have a fuse lit under the banks, and look at who is orchestrating this. Lael Brainerd, but the bigger one would be Jared Bernstein, who was just appointed head economic advisor to the Biden administration. Jared Bernstein's main thesis is losing the world reserve status. He wrote a report in 2014 called King Dollar No More. It was picked up in the New York Times. You can Google it, pop right up. This is a guy who advocates for no longer maintaining world reserve because of the distortions it creates and the trade imbalances. Well, look at what we've done by weaponizing the dollar. You can say that's exactly the path we are heading down. We are antagonizing Saudi Arabia, and we are weaponizing the dollar. The rest of the world is looking for alternatives. You could not draw it up any better. One guy wants to get rid of the world reserve, and the other wants to get rid of all the banks and go digital currency. Could it be this is a planned path that we are doing what we are doing to finally get to a point where we can consolidate all the banks, we can roll out a CBDC, and we ultimately lose the world reserve status? Why? Because our debt burden is so big that we can never find our way out of it. So if you find a villain instead who ruined the American way of life, rather than it being the brain dead monetary policy of the Federal Reserve and the fiscal policy of the government, who have created more money in 4 years in the history of the country before it, while maintaining 0% interest rates, creating distortions that have to work themselves out. And when they do, it blows up the system. Well, now there's your villain. So I get, everything that is happening, you have to ask yourself, is it done coincidentally, or is there a bigger agenda here? And I am beginning to believe that this is all being done purposely. They know where we are heading, and look at the people advising the president.